Back in update 1.8, RobTop had a brilliant idea. What if there was two icons at the same time? And just like that, the Dual portal was born. Ever since then, Dual has been a pretty mixed reception. Some people love it, while others not so much. Over the past 5 years, I've spent countless hours creating, testing, and refining Dual gameplay. I've also worked with other creators to help improve their own Dual building skills. And throughout all of it, I've noticed one thing. A lot of players panic when they see a Dual portal. When the second icon appears, they stop thinking and start reacting and usually end up dying. This has created a negative reputation for the Dual as being confusing or learny, especially for asymmetrical duels. But that's not true. In fact, I think asymmetrical duels can be some of the best gameplay to sight read. So today I'm going to show you how to create asymmetrical duel gameplay that players can actually read on their first attempt. First thing we need to understand is how players actually read gameplay, because they don't read gameplay the way creators do. When you're building a level, you spend hours staring at every click. You know exactly what's supposed to happen. The player doesn't. They see everything for the first time. One of the biggest mistakes that creators have is assuming that players are paying attention to both icons equally. They're not. Human nature wants you to focus on one thing at a time. The moment you force players to look at multiple places on the screen simultaneously, that becomes overwhelming. That's why so many duels feel confusing, not because the gameplay is difficult, but because the player's attention is being split apart. The goal of a good duel isn't to give player two things to focus on, it's to make the two icons feel like one thing. This leads to one of the most common mistakes I see. A lot of creators design gameplay for one icon and then just add a second icon in because it's technically a duel. The second icon doesn't really matter. It follows the same clicks, barely interacts with anything, and it just kind of exists. And while that technically works, it doesn't create interesting gameplay. More importantly, it doesn't create readable gameplay. Instead, both icons should contribute to the experience. They should feel connected. One of the easiest ways to do this is by making them interact visually, having them cross paths, move around each other, having them share structures, having them overlap. Creating moments where the player naturally sees both icons at the same time makes it easier for players to understand what is happening. Another thing that helps readability is keeping both icons relatively close together. A lot of duels place one icon at the very top of the screen and the other at the very bottom. While that can work in certain situations, it immediately makes sight reading harder. Now the player has to constantly divide their attention between two completely different locations, even if the gameplay is easy. When the icons stay near each other, the player can understand both at once. Their eyes don't need to jump across the screen, and everything important exists in a single small area. This becomes especially important in easier levels. If you're making like a 3, maybe 5-star level, the player should always understand what the icons are doing. The gameplay should communicate that clearly. As difficulty increases, you can introduce situations where the icon behaves differently than the other. Maybe one jump while the other doesn't, or maybe one is in a danger while the other one is safe. But gameplay like that naturally becomes more learny. Personally, I think saving those ideas for harder levels, because the average player isn't expecting that level of complexity in like a 2-star. Now let's talk about something that's even more important, structures. A lot of creators build duels in open space. There are no clear paths and nothing to guide the player forward. The icons kind of just float through empty space, and when players don't know where they're supposed to go, they panic. This causes people to spam in duel sections, and usually spamming makes them die. One easy way to fix this is by using structures to guide the player. Platforms naturally communicate where the player can land, and spikes communicate where the player needs to jump. Same with saw blades as well, as they show the intended arc of a movement. Blocks can guide the player's eyes towards the next click, and good structures act as visual indicators over design. The best gameplay doesn't tell the player what to do. Indicators. Sorry about that, I got something caught in my throat there. Next up is probably one of the most important principles in gameplay design. Every click should have a visible purpose. If a player looks at your gameplay and can't tell whether they should click or not, you've already created uncertainty. Now they have two options, click or don't click. This can confuse the player as both look correct. I actually made this mistake myself in my level called Cut You Off. There's a section where it looks like you don't really need to click even though you do. However, there's nothing fully visual that suggests that you need to jump, as there's no spike or saw blade that you need to go over, so sometimes people just glide off the platform. For a difficult level, this is acceptable to some extent, depending on if you want the level to be learning or not, as people will be playing it in practice most likely. As for easier gameplay, this is unfair. The player should understand what they're supposed to do before they are punished for doing something else. Every click should have a reason. A lot of asymmetrical duels are a complete mess. The icons are on opposite sides of the screen, which makes the duel feel disconnected. You have no clue where you're supposed to be looking at, either icon 1 or icon 2. The problem with that gameplay isn't that asymmetrical duels are bad, it's because you're trying to multitask too much. Because when an asymmetrical duel is built well, the player doesn't feel like they're managing two separate icons. They're just following the gameplay. As said before, things like icon movement, structure that guide you, and having it so that the player isn't overthinking what they're supposed to be doing makes it more enjoyable for gameplay. Another thing I've noticed while building duels is that readable gameplay tends to have movement. A mistake I see fairly often is gameplay that stays completely flat for a long period of time. The icons just move with the center mass of the screen. The click pattern might be fine and the gameplay might technically work, but visually it feels stagnant. The player's eyes stay locked in the same place for several clicks. While this can result in feeling like you only need to focus on one icon, it defeats the point of a duel in the sense of it needing to be connected. Instead of this, try creating a natural flow through the gameplay. Gradually move the gameplay up and down. Having the icons switch which one is leading your eyes helps with readability of the gameplay. Notice how a lot of readable gameplay naturally rises and falls as it progresses. This is not even just for duels, it's for every single game mode. The player is following a route. This doesn't mean that every duel needs to huge movements. Some subtle changes in height are enough. The goal is to simply avoid making the gameplay feel static. If the gameplay flows naturally, the player's eyes will follow it naturally too. Before the player can read your duel, they need to see it. And that's why transitions are so important. Whenever a duel begins, players should immediately understand where both icons are. Giving them time to process, show them the gameplay ahead, and let them see what's coming. If a player enters a duel and dies instantly, that's not usually because the gameplay was bad, it's because the transition did not prepare them for the duel. The best duels teach the player the gameplay before it even begins, having a transition that shows what's coming up next. In the end of the day, duels aren't difficult because there are two icons, they're difficult because creators often forget how players process information. Keeping the duels connected together and having structures that guide attention will make duels feel like one unified experience instead of two separate game modes. Do that and you'll discover some interesting gameplay that will make it so that duels feel readable and enjoyable. Thank you all for watching. Watch this video right here and join my Discord. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!